It all started subtly, in ways that didn't seem alarming at first. I chalked it up to ordinary family disagreements, little squabbles that happen in every household. But the truth was far darker. Dr. Harrison, my physician, looked at me gravely as I sat in the examination room. "Mrs. Eleanor, you are severely malnourished," he said, his voice steady but serious. "You've lost almost 45 pounds. You're suffering from severe anemia, vitamin deficiencies, and chronic dehydration. Your blood pressure is dangerously low. These signs point to prolonged and deliberate neglect." I sat frozen. My daughter, Clara, was at my side, her notebook open, scribbling furiously. Every word Dr. Harrison said felt like a punch to the gut. "Doctor, I need this recorded officially," Clara said, her voice calm but firm. "A full medical report with photographs if possible. This will serve as evidence in a legal case." Dr. Harrison nodded gravely. "Of course, and you should know I am required by law to report this to Adult Protective Services. This is classified as abuse." A shiver ran through me. My own son and daughter-in-law, the people I trusted most, had done this to me. Before we could absorb the weight of the words, Clara's phone rang. It was Brenda, our neighbor. Her voice was urgent. "Clara, you need to know something. I saw Jessica taking out trash bags this morning. Lots of them. Something felt off, so I checked when she left. I found torn documents, bank statements, receipts, legal papers. They're trying to destroy evidence." Clara's eyes narrowed with determination. "Stay put. I'm heading over there with a preservation order. Call the police immediately and report the destruction of evidence." We didn't waste a second. Driving straight to Mark's house, we saw a police cruiser outside. Brenda was already there, speaking to two officers while showing them the trash bags filled with shredded documents. Jessica emerged, furious, her voice rising. "This is an invasion of privacy! You have no right to go through my trash!" Officer Morales, tall and composed, explained firmly, "Ma'am, once the trash is on the curb, it becomes public property. We have a report of destruction of evidence in an elder abuse case. Cooperation is required." Clara stepped forward, holding a thick folder. "Officer Morales, I am my mother's legal representative. Here is evidence of financial abuse, neglect, and embezzlement by Jessica and Mark. Bank statements, medical reports, photographs, everything meticulously documented." The officer's face stiffened. "This is very serious. We'll need statements from everyone involved." Mark came out, pale and shaky. "Clara, we can resolve this as a family. No need to involve the police." "You let our mother starve while spending her money on luxuries," Clara shot back, her voice sharp. "There is no family here, Mark. Only criminals." The following days were a whirlwind. Clara and I worked tirelessly to build a record of what had happened. She hired Daniel, a lawyer specializing in elder abuse cases. He went through every statement, every bank transfer, every receipt. "This is one of the most egregious cases I've seen," Daniel said one afternoon, reviewing documents in his office. "They didn't just steal her money. They isolated her, starved her, destroyed her dignity. This is psychological abuse, almost like torture." Clara didn't stop there. She uncovered more evidence on Mark's computer. Among his recent searches were chilling instructions: low-cost nursing homes, how to sedate an elderly person naturally, medication to make old people sleep, average life expectancy after 65, and how to accelerate cognitive decline in seniors. Clara printed every page and added it to our growing evidence file. One night, as we went through the findings, she looked at me gravely. "Mom, they weren't just after your money. They wanted you gone. They were planning your deterioration to inherit everything sooner." The truth hit me like a hammer. My own son had searched ways to shorten my life. It wasn't greed alone. It was calculated, malevolent planning. We also recovered deleted text messages between Jessica and Mark. Jessica wrote, "If we give her less food, she'll get weaker faster. Less medical expenses later." Mark replied, "Are you sure? I don't want it to look obvious." And she answered, "No one suspects anything. Your mother has no one else. We can do whatever we want." Every message was a knife in my heart. Every word revealed the depth of their betrayal. They weren't merely thieves. They were monsters scheming to destroy me. Clara organized every piece of evidence. Bank statements showing $72,000 spent in 6 months. Photographs of my squalid room. Medical reports detailing my malnutrition. Witness statements from Brenda. Internet searches. Recovered messages. Everything meticulously filed. Daniel filed both a civil lawsuit for embezzlement, financial abuse, neglect, and emotional distress, and a criminal complaint with the district attorney. At the same time, Clara went to the bank with evidence showing the power of attorney had been obtained under deception. Linda, the bank manager, immediately froze Jessica's access to all accounts. Automatic transfers were stopped, and all cards linked to my account were canceled. We also recovered money from the sale of my house, $142,000 of $180,000 total, and updated my will to leave everything to Clara, disinheriting Mark completely. A clause ensured that any challenge from Mark or Jessica would forfeit even sentimental items. For the first time in months, I felt a spark of control return. The battle was only beginning, but Clara and I were ready. The days after the initial legal filings were tense. Clara and I were constantly moving between offices, Daniel's law firm, the police station, the bank. Every time we thought we were making progress, another layer of deceit would emerge. One morning, Clara called me into the living room with a folder in her hands. Her eyes were wide, a mixture of determination and horror. "Mom, I checked Mark's computer again. There's more. I found his search history from the past few months." He looked up low-cost nursing homes, natural sedatives for elderly, and even how to accelerate aging in seniors. This isn't just greed. This is premeditation. I felt a chill run down my spine. The person I had raised, the boy I had loved as a son, was actively planning my decline. "They wanted me gone," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "They weren't just stealing. They were scheming my death." Clara didn't flinch. She compiled every page, every message, every shred of evidence into an expanding case file. "Mom, we're going to show the authorities everything. This file will be our weapon. They need to face consequences." A week later, The police arrived at Mark and Jessica's home with a preservation order. Brenda had gathered all the trash bags, filled with shredded bank statements and receipts. Jessica stormed out, shouting about invasion of privacy. But Officer Morales explained the law calmly. Once trash is on the curb, it becomes public property. With a complaint about destruction of evidence in an elder abuse case, their hands were tied. Clara stepped forward, presenting the folder of meticulously gathered documents, bank statements, photographs, medical records, messages, even internet searches. Everything was there. Officer Morales's expression turned serious. This is indeed a severe case. We will need sworn statements from everyone involved. Mark came outside, looking pale. Clara, we can fix this as a family. There's no need to involve the police. Clara's glare was icy. You watched me starve, Mom starve, while you spent her money on luxury trips and gadgets. There is no family here. Only criminals. Over the next few weeks, Daniel prepared both civil and criminal cases. He meticulously reviewed every transaction and every document. Combined with the internet searches and documented neglect, this suggested attempted, premeditated murder. I sat with Daniel as he laid out the evidence. Mom, this isn't just civil. The criminal implications are huge. They can't escape prison if the district attorney pursues this properly. Within days, the district attorney's office became involved. Mr. Patterson, a prosecutor with a reputation for being relentless in elder abuse cases, took over. Mrs. Eleanor, he said, looking at me with intensity, we're going to make sure they pay for every day of suffering. This isn't only about money. It's about the psychological and physical torment inflicted on you. Meanwhile, Clara went to the bank, showing Linda, the manager, the full set of documents proving that the power of attorney had been obtained under duress. Linda froze all accounts immediately. Automatic transfers were stopped. Cards were canceled, and all access Jessica had was revoked. We also addressed my will. The previous one, manipulated during my captivity, left everything to Mark. Clara and Daniel ensured a new will was drafted. It named Clara as the sole heir, disinheriting Mark completely. A special clause ensured that if either Mark or Jessica attempted to contest it, they would forfeit all rights, even to sentimental objects. Even the sale of my house, which Jessica had lied about, was corrected. Originally, she claimed it was invested for my benefit, but statements revealed that large sums were being transferred into her personal account. With Clara's intervention, the account was frozen, and $142,000 of the $180,000 was recovered. The remaining $38,000 had been spent frivolously on luxuries over just a couple of months. I began to realize the full scope of the betrayal. Every day, Clara uncovered new evidence, receipts for jewelry, designer clothes, luxury vacations, all purchased with my money, while I survived on leftovers and slept on the floor. Daniel's office became a war room. Every document, message, and photograph was cataloged, cross-referenced, and ready for court. Clara never wavered. She refused to let the depth of their cruelty shake her determination. One evening, as we sat going through the latest findings, Clara looked at me. Mom, They thought they could destroy you silently, but they underestimated us. We're going to make them answer for everything." Her words gave me a strength I hadn't felt in months. For the first time, I didn't feel helpless. The people who had tried to break me had underestimated my resolve. And with Clara and Daniel, I finally felt empowered. The civil case for embezzlement, neglect, and emotional distress was filed. The criminal complaint for elder abuse, conspiracy, and attempted murder followed. Every piece of evidence was submitted. Every shred of cruelty they had inflicted on me was documented. Mark and Jessica tried to negotiate, offering to return a fraction of the money if we dropped charges. Clara laughed. Mom suffered for 6 months. She lost 45 pounds. She ate leftovers on the floor. You think $40,000 fixes that? No. This goes to trial. We're taking everything and then some. And we would. The file was growing every day. The justice we were building wasn't just for me. It was for every senior who had suffered silently at the hands of greedy relatives. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. A small, shining light that maybe, just maybe, I would finally get justice. The morning of the preliminary hearing, I woke up with my heart pounding. Clara and I arrived at the courthouse early. The tension in the air was palpable. Families, lawyers, and court staff moved like pieces on a chessboard. But nothing compared to the storm I felt inside. Every step closer to the courtroom felt heavier, as if the weight of the past year pressed against my chest. As we entered the courtroom, my eyes met Mark and Jessica for the first time in months. Jessica's face was pale, her carefully crafted arrogance crumbling. Mark avoided my gaze, his hands trembling. In that moment, I realized this. They had stolen months of my life, but they had underestimated the strength I had gained. This wasn't just a hearing. This was the first chapter of their reckoning. The judge, an older man with a stern presence, called the court to order. This case involves allegations of severe elder abuse, financial exploitation, and his eyes scanned the room, lingering on Mark and Jessica. The court takes these allegations seriously, and we will proceed accordingly. Clara stepped forward first, presenting the detailed folder of evidence. Every bank statement, medical record, photograph, and recovered message was laid bare. The courtroom fell silent as she spoke. "Your Honor, these documents show a pattern of deliberate abuse. My mother was starved, isolated, and psychologically manipulated while her finances were stolen. The defendants planned her decline as if it were a financial investment." Jessica's lawyer tried to interrupt, but the judge held up a hand. "Silence. The evidence will speak for itself." Then, Brenda, the neighbor who had witnessed parts of the abuse, was called to testify. She described seeing me thinner and weaker every week, how Jessica had threatened her when she tried to ask about my well-being. "She told me to mind my own business," Brenda said, her voice steady but firm. "She said I'd have problems if I interfered. I listened to every word, a mix of anger and vindication swelling inside me. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the cruelty, the betrayal, the years of silent suffering that had been forced upon me." Dr. Henderson took the stand next. He explained my condition in precise medical terms, severe malnutrition, chronic dehydration, anemia, vitamin deficiencies. This could only be the result of prolonged and intentional neglect, he said. Her physical deterioration was systematic. It was planned. Linda from the bank testified about the suspicious transactions, showing how large amounts were funneled into Jessica's accounts, while my personal expenses went unpaid. Every page, every figure, every transaction was laid bare. The digital forensic expert presented the recovered messages between Jessica and Mark. Each message was read aloud. The plans to withhold food, to manipulate my medications, and to accelerate my decline. The cold, calculating language was shocking. One message read, "If she eats less, we save money on her care." Another, "Once she's medicated in the home, she won't be able to protest." Mark squirmed in his seat, sweat forming on his brow. Jessica avoided my gaze entirely. Their carefully constructed defense was collapsing. Clara then brought up the life insurance policy Jessica had taken out in my name. The prosecutor, Mr. Patterson, leaned in. This policy, combined with the calculated neglect, the sedative searches, and the embezzlement, demonstrates an attempt to benefit from her death. This is premeditated and criminal. The room went quiet. Even the judge's expression hardened. It was no longer about petty greed. It was about a planned betrayal. A crime that extended beyond money into life and death. As the hearing progressed, I realized something important. This wasn't just about justice for me. Every piece of evidence, every testimony, was a warning to anyone who thought they could exploit the vulnerable without consequences. The story unfolding in that courtroom wasn't just my own. It belonged to every elder who had been silenced, every family member who had witnessed abuse in silence. By the end of the hearing, the judge issued a restraining order. Mark and Jessica were prohibited from approaching me within 500 yards. It was a small victory, but a necessary one. The civil and criminal cases were officially set to move forward. Outside the courtroom, the weight of months of fear and helplessness finally began to lift. Clara hugged me tightly. "Mom, we're just getting started. But look at them. They're shaking." This is the first time they felt the consequences of their actions. I looked back at Mark and Jessica, their expressions a mix of fear and disbelief. For the first time, I realized the true power of the story I had built with Clara. The documents, the evidence, the courage to speak out. It wasn't just paper and ink. It was truth. And truth was stronger than their lies. As we walked out of the courthouse, a thought settled in my mind like fire in my chest. This wasn't over. But for the first time, I understood something profound. Every step I had taken, every document I had collected, every tear I had cried, they had all led to this moment. Justice was no longer a distant hope. It was unfolding before my eyes, piece by piece. And deep inside, I felt a spark of determination that could not be extinguished. The road ahead would be long, but the walls of deceit that had imprisoned me were finally cracking. The truth was coming to light, and I would see it through to the end. The weeks following the preliminary hearing were a whirlwind. Clara and I spent every day preparing for the civil and criminal trials. The weight of months of fear and suffering had shifted into focus, into purpose. We weren't just fighting for justice for me. We were fighting for every senior, who had been abused in silence. David, our lawyer, worked tirelessly. Every document was scrutinized, every financial transfer cross-checked, every message and search history verified. "This is one of the most thorough cases I've ever seen," he said one morning, scanning the folder of recovered evidence. "They didn't just steal money. They planned a slow, calculated assault on your life. Psychologically, financially, medically. It's chilling." Clara and I would sit late into the night, adding to the growing file. Every new piece of evidence was like another brick in the wall of accountability we were building. And as the file grew, so did the sense of purpose burning inside me. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was an advocate, a warrior armed with truth. The day the criminal trial began, the courtroom was packed. Reporters, neighbors, and even strangers whose lives had been touched by similar stories filled the seats. The tension was palpable. Mark and Jessica entered, dressed in suits, attempting to appear calm and composed. But their eyes betrayed them. Fear, shame, and guilt flickered behind the surface. Mr. Patterson, the district attorney, opened with a firm statement. "This case isn't only about stolen money. It's about deliberate, calculated abuse, intended to manipulate, isolate, and accelerate the decline of a vulnerable woman. The evidence you will hear today shows a pattern of cruelty that extends far beyond financial greed." Brenda took the stand first. Her testimony was detailed and unwavering. She described the conditions she witnessed: my emaciation, my isolation, the cruel taunts, and the manipulations. "She was left without proper meals," Brenda said, her voice steady. "I could see she was getting weaker every time I saw her. When I asked questions, I was threatened." Next came Dr. Henderson. His explanation of my medical condition was clinical but devastating. He outlined the extreme malnutrition, dehydration, anemia, and vitamin deficiencies I suffered. "These conditions are not accidental," he said. "They result from prolonged intentional neglect. There's a clear, deliberate pattern here." Then came the financial evidence. Linda from the bank presented detailed reports of transactions, transfers, and withdrawals. Large sums of my savings and pension had been siphoned into Jessica's personal accounts. Statements that should have funded my care had instead funded vacations, designer clothes, and luxuries. Every document was laid out before the jury, unassailable in its clarity. The most harrowing part was the digital evidence. The forensic expert displayed the recovered messages between Jessica and Mark. Every word was read aloud. Plans to withhold food, discussions about sedatives, strategies to manipulate and isolate me. Conversations calculating how fast my health could deteriorate to maximize their gains. The cold, methodical language shocked the courtroom. Mark squirmed, his hands shaking. Jessica refused to meet my eyes, her face pale and tight. The facade of control they had maintained for so long had crumbled entirely. Then, the life insurance policy was presented. A policy in my name, with Jessica as the sole beneficiary. Mr. Patterson addressed the jury directly. This, combined with the financial exploitation, the deliberate neglect, and the calculated searches for sedatives and ways to accelerate her decline demonstrates attempted, premeditated murder. This is not merely a financial crime. It is a life-threatening conspiracy. The jury was silent, absorbing the gravity of the evidence. The coldness, the planning, the betrayal. It was undeniable. When it was my turn to testify, I felt the familiar knot of fear in my stomach. But I looked directly at Jessica and Mark and spoke with clarity. I recounted the months of deprivation, the isolation, the constant psychological torment. I described the nights I slept on the floor, the meals I wasn't given, and the luxury they indulged in at my expense. I told them how betrayed I felt, how the people who should have loved me instead plotted against me. Jessica's eyes flicked to the floor. Mark wept silently. But I no longer sought their apology. I only sought the truth to be heard, justice to be done. The civil trial ran concurrently, with David presenting claims for restitution, medical expenses, emotional suffering, and punitive damages. He systematically showed how every dollar stolen, every day of neglect, and every moment of cruelty added up, not just financially, but in human cost. Jessica's lawyers attempted to negotiate a settlement, $40,000 in return for dropping charges. Clara laughed, a bitter edge to her voice. My mother suffered 6 months of starvation and humiliation. $40,000? That's not a settlement. That's an insult. The offer was refused, of course. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the verdicts came. In the civil case, Mark and Jessica were ordered to repay the $72,000 stolen from my pension, the $38,000 taken from the house sale, plus $200,000 in compensatory damages and $500,000 in punitive damages. Total, $840,000. The criminal verdict followed swiftly. Guilty on all counts. Aggravated embezzlement, elder abuse, criminal negligence, conspiracy, and attempted murder in the second degree. The sentencing was severe, but just. Jessica received 12 years. Mark received 8. Both were immediately remanded into custody, with restraining orders ensuring they could never approach me again. As the gavel fell, a deep sense of relief washed over me. The people who had stolen my health, my dignity, and my peace had finally been held accountable. Walking out of the courtroom, I realized something profound. This wasn't just my victory. Every senior, every family member who had been silenced, had witnessed the possibility of accountability through our fight, and the foundation we would soon build would ensure no one suffered in silence like I had. For the first time, the future felt lighter, brighter, and truly free. The days after the trials were unlike anything I had experienced in months. The courtroom battles were over, the verdicts delivered, and yet the echoes of what had happened still lingered in my mind and body. Every night I would wake up briefly, heart racing, remembering the cold floor, the hunger, the isolation. But there was something different now, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. Clara was my anchor. She had been my protector, my strategist, my advocate, and now she was my shield as I began the slow process of healing. We spent mornings organizing the recovered funds and reviewing the civil judgment. The $840,000 awarded to me was a staggering amount. But it wasn't just money. It was proof that justice, however delayed, could still be delivered. It was a tool I could use to create change. One afternoon, while sitting in the sunlit kitchen with a cup of tea, I voiced the thought that had been simmering in my mind for weeks. All of this, my suffering, it can't just end with us. There are thousands of seniors out there, suffering in silence, isolated, abused. We have to do something. Her eyes widened. Mom, what are you thinking? ... I want to create a place, a foundation where seniors like me can find help. Legal help. Someone to listen to them. Someone to believe them. No one should go through what I went through alone. Clara smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. That's incredible. And we can do it. With the money from the lawsuit, we can hire lawyers, social workers, set up a 24-hour helpline. We can make sure no senior feels invisible ever again. We called it the Silent Voices Foundation, a name that captured exactly what we were fighting against. The voiceless seniors, silenced by fear, manipulation, and neglect. Over the next 3 months, we worked tirelessly. We rented a small but functional office downtown. Clara and I hired 2 attorneys, specializing in elder protection, a social worker, experienced in trauma care, and a helpline operator who would staff the phones around the clock. The response was immediate. Within the first week, we received over 70 calls. Each story was a mirror of my own pain. Elderly women whose pensions were stolen by their children, men confined to basements while family members rented out the rest of their homes, grandparents coerced into signing over property in exchange for empty promises of care. Every story fueled our resolve. One call in particular struck me deeply. A woman named Margaret, 72 years old, spoke through tears. I thought I was imagining it. My daughter-in-law controls every penny. I can't leave my room without someone watching me. I thought I deserved this, but now I know I don't. Please, help me. That call became the Foundation's first rescue case. Clara and I coordinated with local authorities, and within a week, Margaret was free, her finances restored, and her living situation secure. The Foundation didn't just stop at legal intervention. Clara and I began giving talks at community centers, senior clubs, and even local churches. We educated people on signs of elder abuse, explained legal rights, and emphasized that speaking up wasn't shameful, it was brave. We reminded seniors that isolation is the abuser's ally, and connection is the victim's shield. Meanwhile, I focused on rebuilding my own life. With Clara's support, I regained my strength, my appetite, and my health. The years of starvation, neglect, and psychological torment had left deep scars, but I was determined not to let them define me. Dr. Henderson monitored my recovery, noting improvements in weight, blood pressure, and overall vitality. Slowly, my cheeks regained color, my hair regained luster, and my body reminded me that it was still mine to care for. Therapy became an essential part of my journey. Dr. Natalie, a trauma specialist, helped me confront not only the abuse I endured, but the guilt I had carried. "None of this was your fault," she would say gently during our sessions. "You were manipulated, coerced, and betrayed. Being a victim doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. Your survival, your strength, and your voice are proof of resilience." Her words were liberating. I began to release the crushing weight of self-blame, replacing it with determination to prevent others from experiencing what I had endured. Every day I spent with the foundation, every call we answered, and every senior we helped became a balm for my soul. Within the first 6 months, the Silent Voices Foundation expanded. We opened 2 additional offices in neighboring cities, hired more staff, and extended our helpline coverage. Clara and I worked to build a network of volunteers, social workers, and legal professionals committed to elder protection. Our mission was simple, but powerful. No senior would suffer in silence while we had the means to intervene. As the foundation grew, so did the stories of hope. Seniors who'd been trapped in abusive situations regained their independence. Families who had turned a blind eye were held accountable. And slowly, the community began to see that elder abuse wasn't rare or isolated. It was a crisis, one that demanded attention, awareness, and action. One day, a letter arrived from a woman named Ashley. She wrote, "Dear Eleanor, your story gave me courage. For 3 years, I lived exactly as you did, isolated, controlled, and fearful. But your fight showed me that help exists. I called the foundation, and now my life is free again. You saved me without even knowing it. Thank you." I framed the letter on my desk, a constant reminder of why the suffering, the fight, and the pain had purpose. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was transforming trauma into change, into hope, into action. For the first time in years, I felt a deep sense of fulfillment. My suffering had not been in vain. Every senior rescued, every abuser held accountable, and every story heard was a testament to the power of courage, persistence, and justice. And in the quiet moments, sitting in Clara's sunlit living room, sipping tea, and watching the world go by, I realized something profound. My life was no longer defined by what they took from me. It was defined by what I gave back, by the voices I lifted, and by the hope I created. The second year after the foundation was launched brought growth, challenges, and remarkable victories. The Silent Voices Foundation had evolved from a small office with a handful of staff into a recognized hub for elder protection. Calls poured in from every corner of the city, and sometimes even from neighboring towns. Seniors who had lived in fear for decades finally felt empowered to speak. Clara and I worked tirelessly, often late into the night, reviewing cases, coordinating legal action, and offering emotional support. I discovered that the most powerful tool wasn't just the law, it was listening. Every senior who called needed to know they mattered, that their story was valid, that someone cared. The stories I heard were heartbreaking. Grandparents locked away while adult children sold the family home. Widows tricked into signing over savings. Elderly men humiliated and isolated in their own homes. One case stayed with me more than others. Mrs. Edith Harper, 79 years old, had been trapped in her home for years by her son and daughter-in-law. They controlled her finances, monitored her every move, and refused to let her see visitors. When she called the foundation, her voice trembled, fear dripping from every word. "I can't leave my house. They'll punish me if I try. I don't know who to trust," she whispered. We quickly coordinated with social services and law enforcement. Clara and I personally went to meet Mrs. Harper, finding her pale, frail, and trembling. Her home, though filled with trinkets and furniture, was a prison. We organized an intervention, legally removing her from their control and restoring access to her finances. The look of relief on her face, as she finally held her own bank card, brought tears to my eyes. That day, I realized more than ever how critical our work was. Without it, she might have never escaped. The foundation also became a training hub for volunteers and staff. We held workshops on recognizing signs of abuse, legal procedures, and emotional support. Clara spearheaded a mentorship program, connecting seniors who had recovered with those still trapped in abusive situations. "Sometimes all they need is to see someone who made it out," she said, "to know it's possible." Meanwhile, I continued to heal physically and emotionally. Therapy with Dr. Natalie was ongoing, helping me navigate lingering trauma and nightmares. Even as my body recovered, the memories of that cold, lonely room remained vivid. I learned to confront them without letting them control me, transforming fear into motivation. I realized that my purpose was not only to survive, but to prevent others from being victimized as I had been. One afternoon, while reviewing a new set of financial abuse reports at the office, Clara called my attention to a headline in the local newspaper. "Silent Voices Foundation saves elderly woman from financial exploitation." It was about Mrs. Harper. The article detailed the foundation's role in uncovering hidden bank transfers and legally reclaiming her money. Seeing the story in print, reading about our actions in a public forum, I felt a swell of pride. One particularly memorable seminar was held in a crowded community hall. I spoke to over 100 seniors, many with tears in their eyes, some clutching hands tightly, others shaking from years of suppressed fear. "You are not alone," I told them. "No matter your age, your story matters. Speaking up isn't weakness, it's bravery, and help is always available." Afterward, dozens approached the stage, sharing brief, hushed versions of their stories. Some of their tales mirrored my own experiences so closely, it was almost impossible to hold back my tears. The foundation also started documenting cases and statistics to raise awareness at the policy level. We compiled data on elder abuse, financial exploitation, and neglect, and submitted reports to lawmakers. Our goal was to influence legislation, to ensure laws existed not just on paper, but in practice, protecting seniors from the kind of cruelty I had endured. In quiet moments, I reflected on my journey, from that cold room, sleeping on the floor, eating leftovers, and fearing every interaction with my own son and his wife, to now, a woman with purpose, a leader, and a protector of the voiceless. I had turned every tear, every moment of despair, into a weapon against abuse. My life was no longer dictated by fear. It was driven by purpose. There were moments of lightness, too. Clara and I shared mornings sipping coffee in the sun, afternoons organizing events for the foundation, and evenings laughing over small, comforting meals. I also began forming new friendships with other women who had survived abuse, sharing experiences, learning from one another, and finding joy in companionship. The impact of the foundation reached beyond individual rescues. Families were being reunited, abusers were held accountable, and communities were becoming more vigilant. Seniors began sharing our message with one another, creating a ripple effect of awareness and advocacy. Every time I answered a call, met a senior, or intervened in a case of abuse, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The foundation was no longer just a response to my own suffering. It was a movement. And with every life touched, I realized something profound. My pain had become power. My suffering had become strength. And my survival had become a mission that would outlive me. By the third year, the Silent Voices Foundation had expanded beyond the city. Offices had opened in 2 more towns, each staffed with lawyers, social workers, and volunteers trained to respond quickly to reports of abuse. Seniors across the state were now calling in, sharing stories that were eerily similar to mine, and the sense of urgency only grew. Every case reminded me why the foundation existed. Every rescued senior reminded me that my suffering had a purpose. One afternoon, while reviewing case files in the office, Clara came running in, excitement in her eyes. "Mom, you need to see this," she said, waving a letter from the governor's office. I opened it with trembling hands. The governor was formally recognizing the foundation for its role in elder protection and invited me to speak at a statewide conference on elder rights. My story, the story of abuse, betrayal, survival, and advocacy, would be presented to policymakers, law enforcement, and social workers from across the state. The day of the conference, I stood on a large stage, looking out at hundreds of people who had gathered to listen. Reporters, government officials, social workers, and families of victims filled the hall. Clara was by my side, holding my hand tightly. I began speaking, my voice clear and steady, despite the butterflies in my stomach. 5 years ago, I was invisible, I began. I slept on the floor, hungry and afraid, while my own son and his wife stole my dignity and my money. I thought my life had ended, that I would never be heard. But today, I stand before you, not as a victim, but as a voice for thousands of seniors who are suffering in silence. Elder abuse thrives when it goes unnoticed, when it is ignored, and when victims are too afraid to speak. Our responsibility is to change that. Our responsibility is to protect, to empower, and to act. The room was silent, the audience hanging on every word. After I finished, a standing ovation erupted. People approached me afterward, some with tears in their eyes, sharing their own stories of abuse or their experiences helping a loved one. A reporter asked me for an interview, eager to cover my journey and the foundation's impact. That night, The story was broadcast statewide. Calls to the foundation surged immediately. Over 150 seniors reached out in just 2 days, many for the first time ever daring to ask for help. It wasn't just recognition that filled my days. The foundation began influencing policy changes. Through detailed reports, we highlighted loopholes in new oversight of financial powers of attorney, the lack of mandatory reporting for suspected abuse, and the inadequate monitoring of elder care facilities. Lawmakers took note, and within months, a bill was proposed to enforce stricter protections for seniors in vulnerable situations. It included regular check-ins by neutral third parties for seniors under someone else's financial control, mandatory reporting requirements for suspicious activity, and severe penalties for exploitation or neglect. Clara called it our Eleanor's Law. Even as the foundation grew, I focused on personal healing. Therapy with Dr. Natalie continued, and I began noticing subtle but meaningful changes in myself. Nightmares were less frequent, my sleep was deeper, and I could eat without anxiety, walk without flinching, and laugh freely without guilt. I was learning that survival wasn't just living, it was reclaiming joy, purpose, and peace. I also reconnected with the community in ways I had never imagined. Social events, small gatherings, and book clubs allowed me to form new friendships. One of my closest companions was Mrs. Linda Harper, 73, a woman who had experienced abuse from a distant relative years before. Her humor, wisdom, and warmth became a constant in my life, a reminder that even after trauma, life could be rich and full. One day, we received a call from a young woman named Melissa. She was in tears, describing how her grandmother was being financially exploited and kept isolated by family members. The details mirrored my own story so closely, it was impossible not to feel a knot in my chest. Clara and I immediately organized a response team. Within a week, we had visited, assessed, and legally intervened, successfully restoring the grandmother's access to her finances and her independence. Later, Melissa sent a heartfelt note. Your story gave me courage to act. Without you, my grandmother might still be suffering. Thank you for showing that one person can change everything. I framed that note and placed it on my desk beside a photo of Ashley, the woman we had rescued years ago. Each story was a reminder of why the foundation existed, of why my voice mattered, and of how far we had come. Despite the growing responsibilities, I never forgot the lessons from my past. I remained vigilant about self-care, health, and surrounding myself with people I trusted. Clara, ever attentive, made sure my routine included exercise, nutritious meals, and moments of peace. She often reminded me, Mom, you can't pour from an empty cup. Helping others is amazing, but you also deserve care, love, and joy. As the years progressed, the foundation became a recognized authority on elder protection. National organizations sought advice. Universities invited me to speak to students studying law and social work, and other states requested guidance on establishing similar support networks. Each invitation reinforced a truth I had come to understand deeply. My suffering had not been in vain. It had given birth to something far greater than myself. A movement that could protect generations of seniors. And still, there were moments of quiet reflection in the garden, sipping tea with Clara, listening to the birds, feeling the warmth of the sun. Those moments reminded me that life, while complicated and sometimes cruel, also offered beauty, healing, and connection. I had learned that the greatest victories were not just in courtrooms or headlines, but in the restored dignity, safety, and hope of those we helped. By the end of the 3rd year, the Silent Voices Foundation had become a beacon of hope. Hundreds of seniors had regained their lives, abusers had been held accountable, and communities had learned the power of vigilance, advocacy, and love. And through it all, I had transformed, from the frightened woman who once slept on the floor to a survivor, a warrior, and a leader whose voice refused to be silenced. 5 years after my rescue, life felt like a delicate balance between reflection and purpose. The foundation had grown into a force that no elder abuser could ignore. And yet, despite the public victories, my heart still carried echoes of the past. Every now and then, I would catch myself flinching at sudden noises, or waking in the middle of the night, remembering the pulled floors, the empty meals, the calculated cruelty. Healing was not linear, but it was happening. One bright morning, Clara called me into the living room, a letter in her hand and a smile on her face. "Mom, this just came in," she said. It was from a woman named Eleanor. Yes, another Eleanor, a senior who had reached out to the foundation after seeing our story in the news. She described how her own daughter-in-law had tried to manipulate her finances, isolate her from friends, and make her feel invisible. But thanks to the foundation, she had courageously reported the abuse and regained control over her life. Reading her words, I felt a warmth spread through me. This was why every moment of suffering had mattered. The cycle of silence was finally being broken. The following months were a whirlwind of activity. The foundation opened 2 new offices in neighboring states. Clara had become a leader in her own right, training volunteers, organizing legal teams, and coordinating social workers to respond immediately to calls. The network was expanding, creating a safety net for thousands of seniors. Each case file represented a human life we were saving, each story a testament to the difference one voice could make. I also began traveling to speak at national conferences. Universities invited me to share my story with law and social work students. Policymakers listened intently, often taking notes, asking questions about elder protection laws, mandatory reporting, and how to prevent exploitation. One day, a congresswoman approached me and said, "Eleanor, your story and your foundation have already changed countless lives. We're drafting federal legislation inspired by your work. It will require stricter oversight of powers of attorney and harsher penalties for elder abuse nationwide." I couldn't hold back tears. The personal pain I had endured had rippled outward to create meaningful change on a national scale. Yet amid all this, personal life and small joys became equally important. Clara and I spent quiet afternoons in the garden, sipping tea, reading books, and watching her children play. Their laughter reminded me of innocence and joy, things I had almost forgotten existed. We celebrated birthdays, holidays, and ordinary Sundays with warmth, love, and freedom. I began to truly enjoy being alive again, relishing the simple pleasures that had been stolen from me. There were moments, of course, when I confronted the memory of Jessica and Michael, but the anger that had once consumed me had softened into calm determination. I did not forgive them, nor did I need to. Justice had been served, and my focus was now on protecting the voiceless and advocating for the vulnerable. The weight of their betrayal no longer defined me. My life was defined by resilience, action, and the impact I could create. One afternoon, Clara brought out a box of letters and photographs from seniors who had contacted us over the years. Reading their words, I felt a profound sense of closure. A 72-year-old woman had recovered her savings after her grandson tried to control her finances. An 80-year-old man had been rescued from living locked in a basement while his home was secretly rented out by relatives. Each story reinforced the foundation's purpose, the proof that hope could flourish even after unimaginable pain. Then came an unexpected visit from a young reporter who had heard about our work. She asked, "Mrs. Eleanor, if you could speak to your younger self, the woman who was suffering and alone, what would you say?" I paused, considering the weight of that question. Slowly, I replied, I would tell her to hold on, that even in the darkest moments, help will come, that there are people who will fight for her, who will believe her, and who will stand by her. Most importantly, I would tell her that the suffering she experiences will one day be transformed into strength, purpose, and hope, and that she will live to see her own courage save others. The reporter nodded, visibly moved, and promised to share the story widely. In the weeks that followed, calls to the foundation increased dramatically. Seniors who had remained silent for years were finally speaking up. Each call was a reminder that silence had been broken, that fear could be challenged, and that voices could rise above oppression. Eventually, I decided to revisit the house where my own suffering had begun. It had been sold after the foreclosure, remodeled, and now belonged to a young family. They welcomed me in when I explained my story. Walking through the halls, seeing children laughing and bright colors replacing the cold emptiness, I felt a sense of liberation unlike any other. The very walls that had witnessed my despair were now filled with joy. Tears ran down my face, but this time they were tears of release, of freedom, of life reclaimed. Life continued to flow forward. My hair had turned completely silver, my face marked with the gentle lines of time, but my posture, my voice, and my spirit reflected the strength I had rebuilt. The foundation thrived, reaching thousands of seniors annually. Laws inspired by our advocacy were passed, giving seniors the protection they deserved. And for the first time in years, I truly felt at peace. Some betrayals never deserve forgiveness, and some acts are irreparable. But healing, purpose, and justice are possible. I had become a survivor, a warrior, and a beacon of hope. I had transformed pain into power, despair into action, and cruelty into compassion. Sitting in the garden with a cup of tea, listening to laughter, feeling sunlight on my face, I realized that my life had come full circle. I was free. I was empowered. And I had made the world safer for those who came after me. At 75, I could say without hesitation that I had reclaimed my life. My story, once one of fear and suffering, had become a story of resilience, advocacy, and triumph. And while I could never forget the past, I had built a future where silence was no longer the ally of abusers, where voices could rise, and where hope could flourish. The legacy of the Silent Voices Foundation, the survivors we had helped, and the laws we inspired would endure long after I was gone. My suffering had given birth to a movement. My courage had sparked change, and my voice had become a shield for the vulnerable. For the first time in decades, I could breathe deeply, live fully, and finally say, I am free. I am heard, and I am at peace.